What if the most powerful man in the world forced you to become someone else forever? Picture this. You're walking through the streets of ancient Rome. The year is 67 AD. Rome is at the height of its power and at the edge of madness. The sun burns on marble columns. Merchants shout in crowded markets. Chariots roll past the mighty forum. And then you see him, Emperor Nero himself, ruler of 60 million souls, draped in gold and jewels, striding proudly through the crowd. At his side, a stunning young empress, veiled in silks, face glowing like a goddess. People bow, they cheer, but then whispers cut through the air. Do you know who that is? That empress was born a boy named Sporus. The crowd falls silent. Even the wind holds its breath. Your blood runs cold, because what you're seeing is not love. It's not marriage. It's possession. This is the story of a stolen life, of how the 15-year-old boy was turned into a living ghost to mend an emperor's shattered mind. And with every step they took, Sporus's real name faded further into shadow. Before the tyrant, before the madness, there was just a boy named Nero. At 16, he wore the crown of the Roman Empire. 60 million people, and all their hopes, rested on his shoulders. They called him Golden. They said, "This is the dawn of a new Rome." He cut taxes. He gave bread to the poor. He sang in theaters. He walked among the people. And for a moment, he believed he could be loved. But love, for Nero, was always a dangerous thing. It began with a whisper, not from strangers, from his own mother. She smiled at him during banquets, but behind closed doors, she schemed to take his throne. The same arms that once rocked him to sleep were reaching now for the dagger at his back. Love became a knife, and when Nero discovered her plot, he made a choice no son should make. One night, in a dark chamber of the palace, her screams echoed through the marble halls, and Nero watched her die. They say he didn't flinch, but the boy inside him never walked out of that room. From that day, every smile he saw was painted with betrayal. Every friend, a shadow hiding fangs. Every oath of loyalty, just another lie. The world became a mirror of deceit. And so Nero vowed, if love means pain, then no one will ever leave me. I will own every heart, every soul, every breath. This vow was not shouted to the Senate, not written in scrolls. It was carved quietly, deep inside his mind, like an iron chain tightening each year. The boy who might have been great was dying, piece by piece, and in his place rose something far darker, a man who would burn his own city to see his name in the flames, a man who would carve Rome into a theater and force the world to clap, even as it bled. And soon, that same broken heart, that fear of losing love, would turn on the woman he swore he loved more than life itself. Poppaea.
Her name was Poppaea Sabina. She wasn't just beauty. She was ambition, wrapped in silk, eyes that saw every weakness, words that could bend men like iron. When Nero first saw her, it wasn't just desire. It was fire meeting dry grass. At the time, Nero was already married. Octavia, quiet, distant, a marriage forged in politics. Poppaea was the opposite. She lit up every room she entered. She whispered dreams of glory into Nero's ear, dreams only she could see. To have her, he had to burn everything else. He threw away his marriage. He pushed allies into exile. He paid for her smile with the empire's treasure. But obsession is a hunger that only grows. Poppaea played the game well. She knew Nero's wounds. She fed his need for praise. She promised she would never leave. But she also knew power, and she wasn't afraid to take it. She argued with Nero in council chambers, in private halls, even in front of guards. No one else dared. But Poppaea wasn't afraid. She had seen the boy inside the emperor. She thought she could control him. And for a time, she did. She became empress. The palace bent around her. Every corridor echoed her voice. But the same fear, the same brokenness, that drove Nero to kill his mother, now turned toward the woman he loved most. One night, the walls of the palace shook with their voices. Some say it was jealousy. Some say it was politics. But the truth was simpler and far darker. Poppaea was pregnant. She spoke words Nero couldn't bear. You care more for your image than your family. You'll never change. That's when love shattered. In a burst of rage, Nero lashed out. A single kick, a brutal strike to her stomach. The sound of her body hitting marble echoed like thunder. She collapsed, blood spreading like a shadow across the floor. Servants rushed in. Physicians were dragged from their beds. Nero screamed orders, commanded the universe to obey him. But even an emperor cannot command life. Poppaea died, and with her, the unborn child, who would have been Nero's heir. Witnesses say Nero fell to his knees, begged a corpse to forgive him, cried out to gods who had long since turned away. He embalmed her body, built her a tomb greater than kings. And for days, he spoke to her lifeless form, as though she still breathed. But grief did not heal him. It hollowed him. He told himself she wasn't gone, that she could return, that love could be stitched back together, no matter how broken. And soon, he found a way, or thought he did, because somewhere in the palace, a young boy walked the corridors, and when Nero saw his face, it was like seeing Poppaea's ghost, reborn. His name was Sporus, just 15 years old, a freed slave in the palace, invisible in a city of giants. He dreamed small dreams, a quiet life, a corner of Rome to call his own, freedom that felt like breathing. He had no idea his face would end that dream. One day, Nero saw him. The emperor stopped, frozen, eyes wide with something between grief and madness. Because in Sporus's delicate features, Nero saw her, Poppaea, the same soft cheeks, the same fragile jawline, eyes that for a heartbeat made Nero believe the dead had risen. But Nero didn't see a boy, didn't see a life with its own hopes, its own soul. He saw a canvas, blank, ready to be painted. Sporus was summoned to the emperor's chambers. Servants whispered in fear. No one returned unchanged from Nero's private summons. Nero studied him, walked around him like a sculptor, measuring marble. Before the first strike, he smiled, but it wasn't joy. It was hunger, desperation, clinging to delusion. You, Nero whispered, will bring her back to me. Sporus trembled. He didn't understand. Not yet. That night, the boy cried in silence, as guards dragged him to the imperial physicians. The surgery that awaited him was cruel, unnatural, irreversible, but the pain of knives and fire was not the true torment. The true torture would come after, because from that day forward, every step Sporus took, every breath, would no longer belong to him. It would belong to Nero's fantasy, to a dead woman's shadow, to an identity he never chose. Spring arrived in Rome, but for Sporus, there was no season, no passage of time. Days blurred together in a golden cage. Every lesson, every mirror, every whisper of Sabina stripped away another piece of him. And then Nero announced it, a wedding, an imperial celebration. For the ages, the empire believed its emperor had taken a new bride. But those who whispered in shadows, they knew the truth. Everyone knew. The palace erupted in preparation. Florists imported blooms from across the seas. Goldsmiths melted fortunes to craft a bridal crown. Servants scrubbed marble floors until they gleamed like mirrors. Sporus stood in silence as tailors fitted him with Poppaea's stolen gown. The fabric, once worn by a dead queen, now wrapped around a boy who no longer dared to speak his name. Even the wedding ring was a grave-robbed relic, plucked from Poppaea's tomb. The same band Nero had slid onto her finger, now forced onto Sporus's hand. On the morning of the wedding, thousands gathered beneath towering arches. Trumpets blared, banners unfurled. Rome was watching in the grandest hall of the palace, lit by 1,000 oil lamps. Nero stood like a god before his court, and there, beside him, stood Sporus, painted, perfumed, draped in silks, an empress built from blood and fear. Priests recited sacred vows, guests forced smiles, and swallowed horror. Each applause echoed like chains around the boy's heart. When Nero kissed Sporus, the court cheered, but beneath their masks, they trembled, because even in madness, even in delusion, Nero demanded the theater of obedience. That night, from the highest balcony of the palace, the emperor presented his new bride to the roaring crowds below, and Rome, the eternal city, screamed its approval, while knowing it was witnessing one of the darkest spectacles in its history. From that moment on, Sporus was not just a prisoner. He was an empress, a living ghost, paraded beside a broken emperor who believed he had conquered death itself. The empire that once adored Nero began to rot beneath his feet. Years of madness, extravagance, and blood finally reached a breaking point. Rome burned again, not the fire of hearths or festival torches, but rebellion. Legions rose, governors turned traitor. The Praetorian Guard, his own protectors, turned their spears against him. Whispers spread through marble corridors. The Senate, once silent in fear, now spat one word: monster. But Nero clung to his illusions. He played music in gardens. As the city trembled, he staged theater. As armies marched to end his rule, even as walls closed in, he dragged Sporus everywhere. At feasts, at councils, on the steps of temples. Some thought he kept Sporus close for comfort, but others saw the truth. The emperor was terrified of being alone when the Senate finally declared him an enemy of the state, when his palace guards abandoned him, when even servants fled into the night. Nero gathered what remained of his shattered court and ran, but he did not flee alone. Through dark alleys and moonlit roads, he took his bride with him, the boy he had carved into a dead woman, the ghost he couldn't let go. For days, they hid in rural villas, haunted by hoofbeats, the thunder of soldiers coming to claim his life. Nero paced halls like a trapped animal. He dreamed of escape, of sailing east, of building a new empire where he would still be worshipped as a god. But deep down, he knew Rome was finished with him. As rebels closed in, Nero faced the one fear even he couldn't control: death. And on that final night, in a small, dark villa, surrounded by enemies, the emperor who once ruled the world pressed a blade to his throat and ended his reign with his own trembling hands. Yet for Sporus, this was no freedom. Nero's death did not break the chains. It only passed them to new masters, each one crueler than the last. Nero was gone, but the nightmare was not over. In the chaos that followed, Rome saw 3 emperors rise and fall in just 1 year. Each time power changed hands, they claimed the same prize: Sporus. First, Nymphidius Sabinus. He seized Nero's palace and took Sporus as spoils of war. But not even Sabinus dared undo Nero's cruel transformation. He kept the boy in silks and jewels, parading him like a trophy of imperial decadence. When Sabinus died, another ruler came, and then another, and each time, Sporus was passed along. Like property, the world saw only a mask, an empress, a phantom of Nero's lost love. But beneath that mask was still a boy, still trapped in a golden nightmare. He could not escape. Finally, under Emperor Vitellius, the nightmare reached its darkest hour. Vitellius had a plan, a cruel spectacle for the bloodthirsty crowds of the Colosseum. He ordered Sporus to be paraded before thousands, forced to act out a grotesque play based on myth, a tale of humiliation and death. This time, the theater would not just be Nero's. It would be Rome's. For Sporus, this was the final shackle. Years of stolen identity. Years of pain and silence. Now, the empire wanted to devour what little was left of him. But this time, Sporus would not obey. In a quiet chamber, before the day of the spectacle, he made a choice. One last act that no emperor could take away. He lifted a vial of poison, cool glass in trembling fingers. Perhaps he whispered his real name. One last time, before drinking, the venom burned through his body. But for Sporus, it was not agony. It was release. The boy, who had been carved into an empress, who had been paraded, broken, and owned, at last, belonged to no one. When dawn broke over the Colosseum, there was no spectacle, no theater of humiliation, only a body, finally free of chains. Sporus died before reaching 20 years of age. But in that final breath, he shattered Nero's fantasy forever. 2,000 years, and the dust of empires still clings to the earth. Marble palaces are nothing but shattered bones. The roar of Roman crowds long faded to silence. Yet, the shadow of this story has never left us, because this is not only about Nero, not only about one boy turned into a doll for a mad emperor's fantasy. It's about power. It's about control. It's about what happens when a human being is forced to become someone else's reflection. Sound familiar? It should. Every age, every century has its Neros, leaders, lovers, systems that twist flesh and spirit to fit their hunger. People reshaped, silenced, erased to keep someone else's illusion alive. But Sporus, even trapped in silk, even renamed, even broken, carried something Nero could not kill. Choice. In the end, he did not kneel in the arena. He did not bow to the crowd. He did not play the final scene of their cruel theater. The vial of poison wasn't surrender. It was a door, slammed shut, in the face of every tyrant who thought they owned him. And yet, listen closely, the story is not finished. Not really, because every time someone is turned into an object, every time a name is stolen, every time a voice is crushed to serve a dream that isn't theirs, the play begins again. The question is, when the spotlight turns to you, will you stay silent in the Emperor's theater or walk off the stage and reclaim your own name?